What if Judas wasn't really a traitor? Judas infamously betrayed Jesus. He betrayed Christ with a kiss for 30 pieces of silver. At least that's the story everyone knows. The story comes from the 4 canonical Gospels, but there were lots of different Gospels originally. One of them is now known as the Gospel of Judas. It wasn't actually written by Judas. That's just the name used by scholars to identify it. The Gospel of Judas was only deciphered in 2006. It paints a sympathetic picture of Judas Iscariot. But how reliable is it? The Gospel of Judas was written in the 2nd century. Its authors belonged to one of the Gnostic sects. The Gnostics were early Christians, but the Church Fathers denounced them as heretical. Gnostic writings became known as Apocrypha. They were excluded from the biblical canon. For centuries, they remained lost. Christian theologians only mentioned them in passing. Yet these are historic documents with fascinating narratives. The Gospel of Judas is a papyrus written in Coptic. It claims that Judas was not a villain. According to this document, Judas was Jesus' favorite disciple. Jesus asked Judas to betray him. In fact, scholars argue that betray is a mistranslation. Jesus asked Judas to turn him over to Jewish authorities. This was part of his plan to leave his earthly body and ascend. The Gospel of Judas purports to be a secret account of a revelation that Jesus spoke in conversation with Judas Iscariot during a week, 3 days before he celebrated Passover. In this Gospel, Jesus confides in Judas, telling him,
"You will exceed all of them, for you will sacrifice the man that clothes me."
This meant that only Jesus' body would be sacrificed. His soul would be set free to return to heaven. The Gospel describes other disciples as foolish. Jesus mocks them for celebrating the Eucharist. He ridicules their belief in their own piety.
Jesus said to them,
"Do you know me? How? Truly I say to you, no race from the people among you will ever know me."
Then the disciples all have a nightmare of sin and slaughter. Jesus tells them it's because they are worshiping a false god. The god they worship is actually a lower angel. Jesus explains that this angel is leading them astray. In contrast, Judas is the only one who understands Jesus. He knows he'll be condemned for turning him over. Thus Judas makes the ultimate sacrifice for his teacher. The New Testament has 2 versions of Judas' death. He either takes his own life or is struck dead by God. In the Gospel of Judas, he is stoned to death by the other disciples. This would make him the first Christian martyr. The Gospel of Judas is an important historical document. However, it's far from the only apocryphal gospel. The surviving Gnostic Gospels are very different from the New Testament. At the time they were written, there were many Christian sects. They had differing views on Jesus' life and teachings. The New Testament was canonized in the late 4th century. Some Gospels were made canon, and others were denounced. Modern Christianity is based on the canon, so apocryphal documents are unlikely to change anyone's beliefs. But the Gnostic perspective on Judas is certainly interesting.